The rain came sideways that November, the kind that found every seam in a coat and stayed there. It smelled of wet wool and coal smoke, and the lye soap that never quite left Nell Farrow's hands, no matter how hard she scrubbed them raw against her apron each night. She was the kind of woman a great house never noticed twice, there and gone. Like the girl who blacked the grates before the family woke, like the hand that mended a torn hem and vanished before anyone thought to say thank you. She was 25, a widow, and she worked the laundry at Milestone for 6 shillings a week and a room above the still-room that never warmed past cold. Her husband Tom had gone off a hayloft 2 winters back, quick and quiet, and left her a daughter and a debt, and not much else. She did not speak of it. She had found that grief, like a torn seam, held better if you did not keep pulling at it to see. Before that winter broke into spring, the finest house in the county would very nearly lose its master to a sickness that wore no fever and left no mark, and the only soul in it who saw the truth plainly would be a child of 7, who had not yet learned that the poor are not permitted to correct dukes. If stories about quiet people turning out to be the strongest ones in the room are the kind you want more of, subscribe to the channel before we go any further. Nell's competence was her hands. She could take a shirt torn past saving and return it whole enough that no one but she could find the seam. She had learned it from her mother, and her mother from hers, needle and thread passed down like a name. What her daughter Ivy had inherited was different and stranger, and came from a different woman entirely. Old Hester, Tom's mother, had kept the still-room before the housekeeper's time, and had known every leaf and root that grew within 3 miles of Milestone, which ones eased a fever, and which ones stopped a heart if a hand was careless with the measure. She had died the same winter as Tom, within a month of him, as if she had simply decided there was no more reason to stay. But she had spent 4 years before that teaching her granddaughter the names of things: valerian, poppy, foxglove, never foxglove, not even to look at. Ivy had sat at her knee in the still-room breathing dried lavender and crushed chamomile, and had learned to tell by smell alone a sleeping draught from a poison. She was 7 now, thin, quiet, watchful in a way that unsettled grown women twice her age. She did not chatter. When she spoke, people had a way of stopping to listen, the way you stop when a clock strikes an hour early. That evening, Nell walked the mile back from the laundry house, with her shawl pulled over Ivy's head against the rain, cutting through the stable yard because it was shorter, and because the rain had turned the lower road to a river of mud. That was where she heard it. Not a cry. A boy did not cry when he had learned that crying earned him nothing but a cuff to the ear. It was a low, steady sound, like a kettle just before it whistles, coming from behind the old tack room, where the harness that no one used any more hung rotting on its pegs. She found Peter Coe curled against the wall with his leg bent wrong beneath him, soaked through, his lips gone the colour of the sky. He was 12, small for it, the youngest of the under-grooms. A colt had thrown him against a post 2 days before, and the head groom had said nothing could be broken, because the boy could still wiggle his toes, and the steward, a narrow, joyless man named Ordway, had said a groom who could not work was a groom who could not eat at Milstone's expense, and had told him to sleep in the yard until he decided whether he'd be fit for anything by morning. Nell did not think about it. She set her basket down in the mud and knelt beside him. "How long have you been out here? Since supper, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I do laundry same as your mother did, God rest her." She was already working the buttons of her own coat loose, the one good coat she owned, and laying it over him. "Can you feel your foot?" A bit. That's something. That's more than a bit. That's everything. She looked at the leg in the failing light and did not like what she saw, a swelling gone tight and shiny at the shin, but she had set enough bones in her life, her own father's arm once, a neighbour's wrist, to know what could wait for morning and what could not. This could wait, if it was kept still and warm. You'll not sleep out here. That's foolishness, whatever Mr. Ordway said. He said if I'm found inside he'll turn me out proper. No reference. My mother's dead, ma'am. I've nowhere to be turned out to. Ivy, who had said nothing this whole while, crouched down on the boy's other side and put her small hand flat against his forehead the way she had seen her great-grandmother do 100 times. He's not fevered, she said. That's good. It means the bone didn't poison anything yet. Nell did not ask where a child learned to say a thing like that so calmly. She was already tearing a strip from her own petticoat. She got him into the old tack room itself, out of the rain at least, and packed the leg with cloth and bound it as tight and as gentle as she knew how, using a leather strap for a splint because there was nothing else at hand. She gave him the heel of bread she'd meant for her own supper and did not think twice about it. When he tried, through chattering teeth, to thank her, she waved it off the way she waved off everything. I'd have done it for anyone, she said. Don't make a thing of it. Eat. She did not know that a man stood in the loft above them the whole time, unmoving, having come up the outside stair an hour before to look over a mare gone lame, and had heard every word of it through the boards. He had arrived home from London 2 days early, and unannounced, in a plain travelling coat with no crest on it, and not one soul on the new kitchen staff hired that Autumn would have known his face if he had walked past them in the yard. He watched a laundrywoman give away her only coat, her only bread, and her only evening to a boy who could do nothing for her in return, expecting no one to see it and asking nothing when it was done. She did not know then that the quiet, tired-eyed man in the plain coat, who slipped away down the far stair before she ever looked up, was the Duke of Milestone himself, and that he had just decided, watching her through the gaps in an old loft floor, that he had learned more about her character in 10 minutes than most men learned of their own wives in 10 years. She wrapped Ivy back in the shawl, told Peter she would come check on him before the laundry opened, and walked home through the rain without her coat, not thinking herself brave or good, only thinking that the bread was gone and she'd have to manage breakfast some other way. She did not tell Mrs. Pruitt, the housekeeper, what she had done, because Ordway would have called it interference, and interference could cost a woman her position faster than laziness ever did. She checked on Peter before dawn as promised, found him no worse, and went back to the copper tubs with her hands raw and her mind elsewhere. No one thanked her, because no one but a boy of 12 and a girl of 7 knew there was anything to thank her for, and both of them, in their own ways, kept it quiet. She told herself this was simply how the world worked. You did the kind thing because it needed doing, and then you went back to your washing, and the washing did not care what you had done the night before. 2 mornings later, Peter was found moved to the groom's quarters proper, his leg set correctly by a physician from town who arrived without anyone summoning him, and left without giving his name to anyone but the head groom, and Ordway was informed, in a note carried down from the house and signed only with an initial, that the boy Co was to keep his position and his wages until fit to work. Again, on pain of the steward's own dismissal should he be found disobedient in the matter. Ordway read the note twice, went pale, and said nothing further about turning anyone out into the rain for some time. Nell heard the gossip in the laundry house that afternoon, that some friend of the family, no one seemed to know who, had taken an interest in the crippled stable boy, and she thought, with a small unaccountable relief, that perhaps the world did occasionally right itself without her help. She did not connect it to the quiet man from the stable loft, because she did not know there had been a man in the stable loft at all. She went back to her tubs and did not think of it again that day, though she would think of it a great many times before the year was out. She met the Duke of Marston properly 9 days later, and it took her the better part of an hour to realise she had met him once before. Mrs. Pruitt sent for her on a Tuesday, which was unusual enough to set the whole laundry house whispering before Nell had even dried her hands. She was wanted up at the main house, in the housekeeper's own room, and told to leave her apron on, because it was work she was wanted for, and not scandal. His Grace's linen wants a hand steadier than the upstairs girls have got, Mrs. Pruitt said, without looking up from her ledger. She was a square, grey, dry-spoken woman who had run Marston for 11 years and had buried 2 husbands and outlasted 4 stewards. And she said everything as though she had already decided it and was merely informing you of the fact. You'll do the fine mending 3 days a week, in the house, same wage as now plus a shilling, and you'll keep your mouth shut about anything you see or hear up here, same as everybody does. Can you manage that? Yes, Mrs. Pruitt, good, His Grace only just come home. Don't gawp at him if you pass him in the hall. He hates it. Nell did not gawp. She was setting a fire in the small parlour off the east gallery 3 days later, kneeling at the grate with her back to the door, when a voice behind her said, without any particular warmth or coldness in it, "You've a gift for that leg of Coe's. It's healing straight." She turned, and there he was. Not the Duke she had built in her mind from gossip and distance, some gilded stranger in silk who would not know a hayfork from a hairpin. A tall man, dark-haired, with a face that had been broken once at the bridge of the nose and never quite set right, and eyes the brown of strong tea gone cold, tired even standing still. He wore good clothes, plainly cut, no crest visible from where she knelt. And she knew him. She knew the set of his shoulders and the particular stillness of him, the way a man stands when he is used to not being noticed even when he wishes to be. She had seen that stillness once before, in a loft, though she had not looked up to see the face that went with it. She got to her feet too fast, and did not curtsy, because her knees had gone strange, and she was not entirely certain they would hold the movement. "You were there," she said, "that night. In the stable. I was. You said nothing. There was nothing that wanted saying. You were not doing it to be seen." She felt the heat come up her neck, not shame exactly, something closer to being caught at prayer. "Then you ought not to have watched, Your Grace." "No," he agreed, "I ought not. I did anyway." He looked at her a moment longer than manners required, the way a man looks at a ledger that will not balance the way he expected it to. "You gave the boy your coat. It was raining. You gave him your supper. He was hungrier than I was. You asked nothing for either. There was nothing to ask for. He hadn't anything to give." She heard how plain it sounded, almost sharp, and did not soften it, because softening it would have made it a lie. I'd have done the same for any creature left out in weather like that. A dog, even. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. Gone again before she could be sure of it. Most people, he said, reserve that kind of kindness for where it will be noticed. Then most people are doing it for the wrong reason, Your Grace, and it isn't kindness at all. It's a kind of trade. She heard herself say it, and thought, too late, that a laundrywoman did not correct a duke on the nature of virtue in his own parlour. and steeled herself for whatever came of having said it. What came of it was silence, and then a short, low sound that she realised, with some astonishment, was very nearly a laugh. "No," he said. "It is not. You're quite right." He inclined his head to her, the smallest degree, as one might to an equal rather than a servant, and left the room without another word. And Nell stood by the cold grate with her heart going far too fast for a conversation about coal and kindling, and told herself firmly that it meant nothing at all. It was not the last such conversation. Over the weeks that followed, as the house turned from November into a hard, bright December, she found him in doorways more often than seemed entirely accidental, though she could never afterward have said which of them arranged it. He asked her plain questions, and seemed to want plain answers, not the soft, agreeable ones the upstairs girls gave when he asked whether the new steward's arrangements suited the household. She told him once, when he asked, that Ordway was feared rather than respected below stairs, and that a house run on fear kept its secrets from the man who most needed to hear them. He looked at her for a long moment after that and said nothing, but the following week Ordway's manner toward the lower servants had gone, if not gentle, at least considerably more careful. She learned, in fragments, why a man with everything might carry himself like a man bracing for a blow. Mrs. Pruitt let it slip one evening, mending by the same fire, that his Grace had been near enough engaged 3 years past to a woman of excellent family and excellent manners, who had wept beautifully in front of him, and not an hour later been overheard boxing a housemaid's ears for a stain that was not even the girl's doing. He had broken it off within the month, and had trusted very little in petticoats since, Mrs. Pruitt said, folding a shirt with more force than the shirt required. Nell thought of this, and understood, a little better, the watchfulness in him, the way he seemed always to be listening for the difference between what a person said and what a person did when they thought no one of consequence could see. She noticed, too, small things that did not add up cleanly. A new coat appeared for Peter Coe, warm and plain, with no note attached, delivered by the head groom who claimed not to know its origin. A tutor began coming twice a week to teach letters to 3 of the stable children, including, to Nell's astonishment, Ivy, paid for by some fund Mrs. Pruitt described only as a friend of the estate, and would say no more about however Nell pressed. Nell did not think to connect any of it to the quiet man in the East Gallery. She had decided, sensibly, that dukes did not concern themselves with laundry-women's daughters, and she held to that sensible belief with the same stubbornness she held to everything, right up until the moment it stopped being true. Lady Cassandra Vane arrived at Milestone 3 days before Christmas, in a carriage with a crest so bright it looked freshly painted, and the whole house rearranged itself around her the way a room rearranges itself around a draught. She was the Duke's cousin, his father's brother's daughter, a handsome woman of 30, with a laugh like a small bell struck 3 times, always the same 3 beats, and a way of looking at servants that suggested she was doing arithmetic behind her eyes, and always coming up short of patience. She had a son, Julian, 9 years old, quiet and watchful in a way that made Nell's chest ache with something like recognition, and it did not take a clever woman long in the house to understand why Lady Cassandra had come. The Duke was 32 and unmarried, with no direct heir, and if anything untoward were ever to befall him, the dukedom's trustees would look first to Julian Vane, and to his mother as the natural hand to guide him through his minority. Nell had no reason to think of any of this at the time. She thought of it only as an unpleasant woman come to stay, the kind who rang for tea and complained it was cold though it had been carried up that instant, the kind whose maid changed twice in a fortnight. She thought little else of it until the afternoon of the 22nd, when she was sent up to the drawing-room with a basket of mended linens and found Lady Cassandra there before the fire with 2 other ladies of the neighbourhood, and no warning that she was walking into anything at all. "That is the one," Lady Cassandra said, before Nell had even set the basket down, in the particular carrying voice of a woman who wishes to be overheard. "The laundry girl, the one who has taken to nursing every stray creature on the estate, as though it were her personal ministry. I hear she has quite adopted the stable boy. And a tutor found, for her own child, at the estate's expense. One does wonder how a laundrywoman manages to attract such generosity from persons who ought to know better." The other 2 ladies laughed, small, polite laughs that agreed with everything and committed to nothing. Nell set the basket down very carefully on the table nearest the door. She did not answer at once. She had learned, the hard way, that an answer given too quickly was an answer given in anger, and anger was a luxury a laundrywoman with a daughter to feed could not afford. "I don't know what generosity you mean, my lady," she said at last, and her voice did not shake, though her hands, folded in front of her apron, pressed hard enough into each other to leave marks. "I set a boy's broken leg because it was broken and I was there. I've asked no one for anything since. How very touching." Lady Cassandra's smile did not move above her eyes. "And your hands, my dear, red as a fishwife's. One can always tell a woman's true place by her hands, whatever airs the rest of her puts on." "My hands are red because I work them, my lady. I'd be ashamed if they weren't." There was a small, sharp silence, the kind that happens when a servant has said something true, and no one in the room quite knows how to answer truth spoken so plainly. Lady Cassandra's bell laugh came again, 3 beats, but thinner this time. "How refreshingly direct," she said. "Do run along." Nell did not cry on the stairs going down, though her eyes stung the whole way, because she had trained herself years back not to cry where anyone could see it fall. She did not know that the Duke had come to the drawing-room door in the last moment of the exchange, and had heard the whole of it, and that he said nothing to his cousin then, only because he judged, correctly, that Nell would rather be defended in private than made a spectacle of in front of witnesses. He found her instead an hour later in the still passage outside the linen-room, and simply said, "She had no right to speak to you that way in my house," in a voice gone flat and cold, in a way she had not heard from him before. "She's your cousin, your Grace. She may say as she pleases." "Not in my house," he said again, and that was all, but something in the set of his jaw told her the matter was not finished, and something in her chest, unbidden and unwelcome, was glad of it. She pulled back after that, all the same, the way a burned hand pulls back from a second fire without waiting to see whether it would truly burn twice. The talk below stairs had turned uglier than Lady Cassandra's drawing-room comment. Servants being servants. Someone always ready to say a laundrywoman was reaching above her station, currying favour, playing the pitiable widow to soften a lonely duke's guard. Nell heard enough of it, second-hand and unkind, to write a short note to Mrs. Pruitt asking to be released from the house mending, and returned entirely to the laundry, where at least the gossip could not follow her up 3 flights of stairs. She told herself it was sense and not cowardice. She told Ivy, when the child asked why they no longer went up to the house on Tuesdays, that some doors were better left unopened, and left it at that. She did not know, in those weeks, that the Duke had begun to seem unwell to those who saw him daily. Mrs. Pruitt noted it first. The way he sat too long over his morning correspondence without reading a word of it. The faint tremor in his hand when he lifted a cup. The strange, heavy drowsiness that came over him some evenings before the tea things were even cleared, as though his body had decided, without his consent, to fall asleep sitting upright. The family physician, summoned twice in a fortnight, pronounced it overwork, nervous exhaustion, the natural toll of a man who managed too great an estate with too little rest, and prescribed a nightly tonic to settle him. A tonic Lady Cassandra herself, ever solicitous of her cousin's health, took to preparing personally each evening from the still-room, since the housekeeper's hands were, she said, too occupied with Christmas to be troubled with it. No one thought anything of that particular kindness. No one but a child of 7, who had spent 4 years at her great-grandmother's knee, learning that a spoonful too many of one root could turn a remedy into something else entirely, and who happened, on the 2nd evening of the new year, to be sent up with a basket of mending and to pass the Duke of Milestone in the long gallery, swaying very slightly on his feet, one hand braced against the wall as though the floor had tilted beneath him. "Forgive me," he said, blinking hard, trying to gather himself upright. "I am only tired." Ivy stopped in front of him and looked up, the way she had looked at Peter Coe's forehead in the rain, with the flat, unfrightened attention of a child who has been taught to look at symptoms rather than at people. "You're not tired, sir," she said, quite calmly, as though she were remarking on the weather. "You're drugged." He went very still. "What did you say?" "Your eyes are doing the thing my great-grandmothers did the last winter before she died. Slow, like they don't want to catch up to you turning your head. That's not tired. Tired is yawning and rubbing your face. That's something in you, sir, working on you from the inside." She said it without a trace of fear, the way she would have told him it was raining. And then, because she was 7, and had been raised never to leave a room without her manners, she added, "I don't mean any disrespect." He did not laugh, and he did not dismiss her, though every instinct of a grown man raised to command should have told him to send the child on her way. Instead, he crouched, slowly, until his eyes were nearly level with hers, and studied her the way he had once studied her mother through the gaps in a loft floor. "Who taught you that?" he asked. "My great-grandmother. She kept the still-room here, before your time, I think. She knew every route for 3 miles. And you believe what you're telling me." "I know what I'm telling me," Ivy said, and something in the flat certainty of it, the utter absence of a child's usual eagerness to please, struck him harder than any physician's Latin had managed in a fortnight. He did not answer her again. He straightened, thanked her with a gravity he would ordinarily have reserved for a man twice her age, and watched her go on down the gallery with her mending basket, small and unhurried, entirely unaware that she had just said the one true thing in a house full of people too polite, or too careful, or too frightened to say it. He did not sleep that night. He sat instead in his study with a single candle and the small brown bottle from his nightstand in front of him, turning it slowly in his fingers, and thought of a woman in a rain-soaked stable yard who had once told him, quite plainly, that most people reserved kindness for where it would be noticed, and understood with a cold and settling certainty that he needed a person in this house who spoke exactly that plainly, and that he needed her now. He sent for Nell the next morning, and it was Mrs. Pruitt, not a footman, who fetched her, which told Nell before a single word was spoken that whatever this was, it was not gossip, and it was not favour. She found him in the small parlour off the east gallery, the same room where she had first knelt at his fire, but there was no fire lit now, and he looked, in the grey morning light, older than she had ever seen him. "Your daughter," he said without preamble, "told me last evening that I am not tired but drugged. I did not sleep on it. I thought instead, I have decided she is very probably right, and I do not know who in this house to trust with the saying of it, so I am asking you, because I have watched you long enough now to know you will tell me the truth, whether it is convenient or not." He set the small brown bottle on the table between them. "Can you tell me what is in this?" Nell looked at the bottle a long moment before she picked it up, drew the stopper, and lifted it to her nose. She had not her mother's fine hands for it, not truly, but she had sat at the same still-room table Ivy had, years before her daughter ever did, and some things once learned did not leave a woman entirely. "Valerian," she said slowly, "and poppy. Both good things, Your Grace, in their proper measure. A spoon of each for a bad night's sleep would do a man no harm at all." She lowered the bottle and looked at him, and her face had gone careful in the way it went careful when she was about to say something that could not be taken back. "This isn't a spoon. This is near 4 times a spoon, by the smell of it, night after night, and poppy stacked on poppy that way does more than help a man sleep. It slows him, clouds him. A physician who dosed a patient this heavy for a fortnight straight would either be a very poor physician, or he'd know exactly what he was doing, and want it to look like something else. Who prepares it?" Nell hesitated, because she understood, before he even asked the next question, exactly where this was going, and understood too that there was no way to answer honestly that did not point a finger at the house's most high-born guest. "I don't know for certain, Your Grace. I only know the talk below stairs. They say Lady Cassandra took it upon herself to prepare your nightly tonic these past weeks. Out of kindness, they say, sparing the housekeeper the trouble." He was very quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again his voice had gone flat, in the way it had gone flat outside her door the day of the drawing-room, cold and final. "If I am declared unfit to manage my own affairs," he said, half to himself, "the trustees look next to my nearest male relation still a minor. My cousin's son. And my cousin, as his mother, would manage everything in his name until he came of age. 10 years, perhaps 12. He looked up at Nell, and for the first time since she had known him, there was something almost like fear in his face, quickly mastered. A child told me the truth last night that 3 physicians and a household full of grown people missed, or chose not to see. She's very observant, Nell said quietly. Her great-grandmother was the same. She is more than observant. She may have saved my life, or near enough to it, and she did it the same way you dressed that boy's leg in the rain. Without being asked. Without expecting to be believed. He set the bottle down and looked at it as though it were something venomous, which in its way it now was. "I find I am beginning to understand something about this house, Mrs. Farrow, that I ought to have understood a great deal sooner. The people who are watched least closely are very often the ones worth watching most." It was Mrs. Pruitt, that same evening, who found the proof that would not be argued away, a locked drawer in the small writing desk Lady Cassandra used in her rooms, opened with a housekeeper's master key, and a housekeeper's long-practised disregard for what she was and was not strictly permitted to do in her own domain. Inside it was an apothecary's ledger from the town 3 miles off, showing regular purchases of poppy tincture in quantities no single household tonic could ever account for. Each purchase signed not in Lady Cassandra's own hand, but in a servant's, plainly instructed and plainly frightened, along with a half-written letter to a solicitor in London inquiring, in careful, roundabout language, what evidence a family might need to present before a court to have a peer declared incapable of managing his own estate. Mrs. Pruitt brought it to the Duke herself, and it was in that same quiet exchange that she told him, dry as ever but with something unmistakably softer beneath it, that he was not the only one in this house who had been keeping secrets of a kinder sort. She told him what the below-stairs staff had pieced together over the autumn, that Peter Coe's coat, the tutor for the stable children, the physician who came and gave no name, the quiet word to Ordway that had gentled him overnight, all of it, every strand of it, traced back to the same source, a fund the Duke had established the very week he returned from London and had sworn Mrs. Pruitt to silence over, asking only that, whatever good it did, it be done without his name attached. You might have told her, Mrs. Pruitt said, meaning Nell, folding her hands the way she did when she had decided a thing needed saying whether she was asked her opinion or not. She thinks you a cold man, your Grace, when you're the furthest thing from it. She thinks the kindness in this house comes from nowhere, like weather. I did not do it to be thanked. No, Mrs. Pruitt agreed. But you might, once in a while, let a person know where to send the thanking, if only so they stop thinking themselves alone in the world. Lady Cassandra Vane was confronted the following morning, not before the household, not before her own son, but in the small private study where the Duke conducted the business he did not wish overheard, with only Mrs. Pruitt and the family solicitor, sent for in the night, present as witnesses. There was no shouting. He laid the ledger and the letter on the desk between them and asked her, in a voice that did not rise, whether she had anything to say for herself. She did not weep, though Nell heard afterward, second-hand, that she had tried, and that the Duke had watched her try with an expression that suggested he had seen that particular performance once before in his life, and had no further use for it. She was given a choice, quietly and without spectacle, evidentiary matters being settled far more cleanly than public ones. A small annuity and a house 3 counties distant, sufficient for herself and for Julian, on the condition that she never again set foot at Marston, nor attempt to influence the boy's guardianship, which the Duke settled instead, with the solicitor's blessing, upon a trustee of unimpeachable character, and no blood claim to the title whatsoever. She left within the week. The bell laugh was not heard at Milestone again. The Duke sent for Nell that same evening, not to the small parlour this time, but to the library, where a fire had been lit, and the room smelled of leather and wood smoke, and the beeswax the maids used on the shelves, warm and close after the cold public business of the morning. He did not ask her to sit. He stood by the fire, with his back half turned to her for a long moment, as though gathering something he had been carrying a great while, and did not quite know how to set down gently. "I owe you an honesty I have withheld," he said. "You believed, the night you found me in that stable loft's shadow, that a stranger had watched you. A groom, perhaps, or some passing traveller. I let you go on believing it far longer than honesty allowed, because I found I did not want to be the Duke to you. I wanted, for reasons I am only now able to name, to be simply the man who had seen what you did, when you thought no one who mattered was watching. You might have told me sooner. I might have. I told myself it was caution. It was, in truth, closer to cowardice. I have been made a fool of once before by a woman skilled at seeming one thing and being another, and I told myself I was testing you, when what I was truly doing was protecting myself from finding out You were exactly what you appeared to be, because that would mean I had no excuse left not to love you." She stood very still at that, her hands folded tight in front of her apron, the way they had folded in the drawing-room the day Lady Cassandra had named her hands red as a fishwife's. "That is a great deal to say to a laundrywoman, Your Grace. It is a great deal to say to anyone. It happens to be true regardless of who hears it." He turned to face her fully now. "I wanted to see who you were when you believed no one of consequence was watching. That is the only test that ever tells the truth about a person. You did not know how to be anything but yourself, in that rain, with that boy, with nothing to gain by it. That is why I am standing here now, and not before, because it took me this long to be honest enough to earn the standing. And what is it you want of me, having seen it?" "Nothing tonight," he said. "That is the whole of what I have come to say. I will not ask you to answer me now. I will ask again in the spring, if you will let me, and your no will be exactly as safe with me as your yes would be. I have had enough, in my life, of answers given because someone felt they must. I would rather wait the whole winter for a truth than take a lie in an afternoon." She did not answer him that night either, though not, this time, because she had nothing to say, but because she found she needed the silence to hold what he had said before she trusted herself to speak into it without her voice shaking. Spring came slowly to Marston that year, the way it always did, mud before green, and green before the first real warmth, and through all of it the Duke kept exactly to his word. He did not press her. He came to the small parlour some evenings when her mending work brought her up to the house, and they talked plainly about the estate, about Peter Coe's leg, healed straight and strong enough now that he had begun riding out with the head groom, about Ivy's letters, which had come on so quickly under the tutor's patient hand that she had begun reading the estate's old herbal to Nell in the evenings by candlelight, sounding out the long Latin names her great-grandmother had only ever spoken aloud. It was on an evening in April, with the windows open to a smell of new grass and turned earth, that he asked her again, and this time he did not stand across the room to do it. He crossed to where she sat with her mending and knelt, as he had once knelt to Ivy in the long gallery, so that his eyes were level with hers. "I promised you I would ask once more. In the spring," he said. "I am asking, Nell Farrow, will you marry me? Not because I owe you a debt for what your daughter saw, and not because I mean to rescue you from a laundry tub, because you have never once needed rescuing, in all the time I have known you. I am asking because you are the most honest person I have ever met, and I find I cannot imagine a single evening of the rest of my life that I would not rather spend hearing your plain truth than anyone else's flattery. I have conditions, Your Grace." Her voice was steady, though her hands resting in her lap were not quite. "Name them. You'll speak to me plainly, always, even when it costs you something to do it. You'll never again let me believe a lie for my own comfort, however kindly meant. And whatever I am to you, wife or duchess, or whatever word the law wants to put on it, I'll keep the rest of myself besides. My hands, my work, if I want it. My daughter's say in her own life. I'll not be folded away and put in a drawer like a fine thing kept for show." "Agreed," he said, "to every part of it, and gladly, and something in his face, watching her, had gone entirely unguarded for the first time since she had known him. "Then yes," she said. It was the only word she needed. He reached for her hand then, and drew the glove from it finger by finger, slow and deliberate, and pressed his mouth once to her bare knuckles, and she did not pull away, though her breath had gone thin and quick. He did not kiss her further than that. It was enough, that spring evening, for two people who had each spent so long learning to expect nothing, to be given exactly what they had not asked for. They were married in June, quietly, in the small chapel at Marston rather than in town, though a duke's quiet wedding was still grander than most weddings in the county had ever seen. And Peter Coe stood among the estate's own witnesses on legs that no longer favoured the bad winter that had nearly cost him his place, and Ivy walked ahead of her mother down the short aisle, carrying a fistful of the first lavender from the still-room garden, because Mrs. Pruitt had insisted old Hester would have wanted it so. A year later, almost to the week, the fire in the small parlour burned low on an evening, much like the one where it had all begun, and Nell sat before it with a basket of mending she no longer strictly needed to do, but still did anyway, because her hands had never learned to sit idle, and did not care to now. Ivy, 8 and taller, sat cross-legged on the hearthrug with the old still-room herbal open on her knees, sounding out a new word under her breath. Peter Coe, head groom's apprentice now, had gone home to his own small cottage on the estate with wages enough to keep it warm. Lady Cassandra Vane's name was rarely spoken at Milestone any more, and when it was spoken without heat, the way one speaks of a cold snap long past and safely over. Her son Julian wrote to the Duke twice a year, careful, hopeful letters from the trustee's house 3 counties off, and each time the Duke wrote back himself, in his own hand, because he had decided a boy ought not to be made to pay all his life for his mother's failing. The Duke came in from his study near 10, as he always did now, and settled into the chair opposite his wife's, and for a while neither of them spoke, because they had learned over that first year that silence between them was its own kind of conversation. He reached across, at last, and took her hand from her mending, and drew the glove from it finger by finger, the way he had done that first spring evening, and laced his bare fingers through hers, and did not let go. A rook called. Out by the stables, just now, he said. Just the once. Made me think of that night. Which night? You know which night. He looked at her in the firelight, at the hands that had once been called red as a fishwife's, and had turned out to be the truest hands in the house. I have thought, more than once this year, that I might never have known you at all, if you had done what most people do, and looked away from a boy left out in the rain, because it was not your trouble to mend. It was raining, Nell said simply. Someone had to. He smiled at that, the small, unpractised smile she had learned over a year of marriage, was worth more from him than another man's whole laugh, and said nothing further, because nothing further needed saying. Outside, the rook called once more, and was still, and the fire settled, and the gloves lay forgotten on the arm of her chair, and neither of them moved to pick them up. Character, the old still-room saying went, is only ever what a person does when they believe no one of consequence is watching, and it had proven, at Milestone, to be the only measure that never once lied. That is where we leave them, hands still joined by a fire that never quite goes cold. If a story about a plain kindness quietly repaid is the sort you want to keep finding in your evenings, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you. I would love to know, in the comments, what you think truly convinced the Duke first, the coat given away in the rain, or the small daughter brave enough to tell a Duke the plain truth to his face. Tell me which one you'd have trusted sooner. Stay close, because there is another quiet house, and another quiet woman no one thought to watch closely enough. waiting for you next time.